Chapter 1 Mr. Ryder. A young boy fiddled with his hands as he walked and looked up at a newspaper stand. The newspaper stand had 3 different rows, each one containing different articles about the towns nearby and the local train station. A few were addressing the matter between slavery and freedom. Others were talking about current events in the towns. He could smell the ink coming off the papers. They must have been freshly printed. He continued to fiddle with his hands, pondering his current situation. I need to find a job or some other way to get money. I can't keep living off the Fields family forever. If I start earning my own money, maybe I could pay back the Fields, eventually buy a small gun for myself. Even if I make enough, how would I ever afford a place for men, Romeo? He thought to himself with a solemn look on his face. He continued to fiddle with his hands as he walked up to a newspaper booth. The boy continued to walk and looked up at the newspaper booth. Behind it was a general store and a job information booth. From what he could see, it was recently repainted. Parts of the side were still unpainted or had dripped down to the bottom. There were splotches of dark green and yellow paint on a piece of wood off to the side of the road. A gold-styled S was present on both sides of the ticket booth. Each side reflected the other. There was a glass pane on the upper half of the booth with a rectangular slot opening on the bottom. Usually, if the current employee was on break or not present, there would be a closed sign either on the window or in the glass slot. However, there was no such sign or label suggesting that there was an employee currently working. A few moments later, the young boy looked around the booth, hoping to find the attendant or employee currently working. After a few minutes of waiting, the boy walked up to the booth and asked for assistance. He cleared his throat before raising his voice and saying, "Excuse me, may I apply for any available jobs or do something to earn money?" hoping that if anyone was here they would present themselves. A few moments later, a tall man in a 2-piece suit appeared from the back of the booth. The outer layer of his suit was black and the inner layer a light tan or beige. He had a green goatee similar to the color of a pine tree's needle. Atop his head was a black bowler hat with a red and black feather stuffed in the hat band. His expression was stern yet also seemed strangely calm. After sitting down, the man looked me up and down, then straightened his tie. After a brief pause, the man cleared his throat and said, "Pardon my late response. I was just clocking in for my shift and did not hear you approach the booth. If you would be so kind, could you please repeat what you asked earlier?" The man replied, "Of course. I was asking if there were any available job listings in this area or the nearby towns. I'm also looking for anything that would also help me make money, even if it ain't full time." The man's facial expression suddenly changed to that of a puzzled one. He mumbled to himself while looking at something under the booth. After a few moments, he looked back up at me and said, "I can't reckon of anything off the top of my head. Let me wrangle up some papers from the back and see if anything would best suit your requests." After saying this, he stood up and excused himself out of the booth into the office. To the right of the general store was the post office. Based on the direction he headed off to, it seemed that the 2 buildings were connected to each other. After a few moments, the man returned with a few papers and a folder. "Before we start looking at the job listings, it is required that every new potential employee fill out a paper application form. It will list out your basic information like your family, occupation, and other things that are relevant to your application. Once you finish them, I will briefly look over them." Once he sat down, he handed me some of the papers and then proceeded to give me a pen. I looked around to try and find something to write on before finding a stray piece of wood. The wood was a bit sandy, so I brushed off the sand and proceeded to fill out the paper. I tried my best to write out everything as neatly as I could without ripping parts of the paper. The first things I filled out were my name and date, Dan River, Thursday the 3rd of October 1856, making sure to check the date twice. It asked for my age and date of birth, age 16, date of birth the 20th of August 1840. I quickly jotted down. Most of the other information inquired about my status and living conditions. It asked for my address and relatives of my family, as well as more personal information like my hobbies and interests. After looking over everything and double checking to make sure I did not miss anything, I handed the paper to the man. The man sat back down after receiving the papers and looked over them. He mumbled to himself here and there, repeating the information that was written on the paper. I waited patiently for him to finish reviewing the papers and again started to fiddle with my hands. A few seconds later, the man looked back up at me and began to ask me a few questions. "You're 16 years old. Your name is Dan River. Is that correct?" "Yes, sir, that is correct," I responded, trying to stand still. Your full name is Dan Ethan Rivar, he said with a curious expression on his face. That is my full name. Why do you ask? Puzzled. I soon became nervous. Oh, no particular reason. It's just that your name sounds very familiar. Pardon my asking, but would you mind telling me what your parents' names are? Scratching his head, he showed a smile. I don't know my parents' names. I can tell you the name of the family I'm staying with though, if that would help any. I hesitantly said, unsure of what to say. He looked at me with a frown before picking up the folder and handing it to me. These are different jobs, but I reckon the best job would be opening at the saloon in Bronze City. You can look at the other listing if you want to, but looking over the information, I believe this would be the best option for you to choose out of all the others, he said, looking at the file. I opened the file and saw the different job listings. One was about an opening in a saloon in Bronze City. Another listing was about a stable hand for hire. Others were requesting waiters or waitresses in restaurants that were newly founded and needed staff. However, the only thing that stood out to me the most was the distance between here and the different jobs. Bronze City was at most a 2-day trip, and that was if you took the train. It would take 8 to 10 days but on horseback, and would take at least several weeks to even a month on foot. I shuddered at the thought of having to walk. I pulled out the paper that held the information on the job listing for the saloon. Below the hiring section in bold letters were now herein at saloon. $5 through $6 per month, or $1.16 between $1.63 per week. This was very good since I only expected to make a few cents under $1 each month. I immediately looked at the other information in the paper. On the back of the paper it also included information about the building. The saloon itself was called the Bronze Bullet. It was a standard 500 feet by 250 feet. It was a 2-story building. The first floor was divided into 2 sections. The main section belonged to the eating area and bar, while the second section was used as the kitchen and storage area. The second floor was used as living space. There were 4 bedrooms, one being the owner's and 3 smaller bedrooms presumably for the workers. I looked through it and was shocked to see that living quarters were provided in the job application. The rent would cost $3 and would automatically be deducted from the paycheck unless paid beforehand. This was great news since buying a house and a stable would cost too much. I also had no way of finding the means to even afford that much money, let alone a single stable. This was a very good opportunity that I simply could not pass up. Although I've no say in the matter, I believe that the best choice would be the opening at the Bronze Bullet. I know the owner of the store, and he is kind to the youth. He mentioned in one of his letters that he would also be willing to let someone work part-time to see if they lack it. This is not mentioned in the paper application, however, the man said, looking at me with a calm smile. Well, I'll be darned, there a certain reason for ye telling me these things, I said curiously. On the paper you stated you were 16. I must admit you are younger than I expected. At least I thought you were 19 or 18. The reason I mentioned the part-time job was I reckoned it would be better to work there for a few weeks to get to know the job. I could write a letter to my friend Pat and ask him if you could work there for 2 to 3 weeks. But you would have to start working there as soon as possible within the next 2 weeks, he said as he took the folder back from me. That sounds great. I would appreciate it very much, I replied in a thankful tone. Of course, no problem. After your time at the Bronze Bullet is over, come back here to let me know whether or not you want to continue working there. I'll remove the application from the folder until you return back here. After saying this, he took the folder and paper back to the post office and returned with a small note of paper. He picked up a pen and wrote something across the piece of paper. I'm assuming that taking the train would be the best since it can take a few days or even weeks to get to Bronze City without it. Unfortunately, the train does not come back to this area until next Thursday. The train comes round here every other week unless something happens on the tracks. You will need to head to the train station and buy a ticket today if you want to catch it by next week, he said, pointing at a location on a map he had brought back from the office. As soon as he said I would have to purchase a ticket, the expression on my face changed from an excited smile to a gloomy frown. I had hoped to simply take the trip to Bronze City on Romeo. However, the main issue was the time crunch. There would be no way for me to get to Bronze City even on horseback within the next week. I pondered before wondering if I should reject the offer the man had given to me. After a few minutes I decided it would be best to try and find somewhere else to work. Once I thought it through, I looked back up at the man and spoke with him. I appreciate the offer, but I reckon it would be better if I found somewhere else to work. Oh, how come? he said as his smile faded when he heard my words. I can't afford to purchase a train ticket and there is no way for me to get to Bronze City within the next 2 weeks even on horseback. Could I look at the other jobs? I said with a frown. The man had a solemn expression on his face as he looked down at me. He mumbled to himself under his breath. I was nervous he would be offended when I refused his offer. Before I could do anything, the man reached in his pocket and pulled out a black leather wallet. Inside were a few loose crumpled papers. He pulled out $10 and reached into his other pocket. Pulling out a couple of quarters, he stuck the wallet back into his pocket. He counted the quarters in his hand and then raised his head to look at me. Suddenly he held out his hand and offered me $7 and quarters. Here, take this. This should be enough to buy a ticket and a stock car for your horse. You can head to the train station and buy a ticket from my friend Emily. Her shift won't end until 8. I'm sure my friend could give you a discount if you mention me in the job application for the Bronze Bullet. I can't accept this. This is your money. I questioned what I had just said to the man. He was offering to give me the money to buy a train ticket, yet I hesitated when he offered me the money. I insist you take this. I believe you would be a good fit for the position at the Bronze Bullet. Don't worry, you do not have to repay me for this. Just take it. He dropped the money into my hands. Before I could refuse, he stood up and walked to the post office. The door creaked as it began to close. I was left dumbfounded. This man who I had just met a few minutes ago had given me enough money to not only buy a ticket for the train but also a spot on the stock car. I stood there dazed. I heard some footsteps coming from the post office. The door swung open and out came a man who looked to be in early 30s or late 20s. He stood with a confident stature and inhaled a big breath of air. The man was wearing a bright white button-up shirt. He had a black belt with a large gold buckle, emblazoned with the crest of an eagle about the size of a large bird egg. His legs were covered by long black pants with a small tint of gray. His shoes were a nice brown leather, similar to the color of an old oak tree. The bottom of his soles were darkened. I could tell he had worn these shoes for an extremely long time. The man turned towards me and walked in my direction. I looked around to see if there was someone behind me. Once I turned around, I noticed that no one else was around. The man continued to walk towards me and I began to worry. On his face he wore a serious expression. His face was not familiar to me and I could not recall a time where I may have met this person. With every step a cloud of dust was leaving the bottom of his soles. He walked up to me and stood in front of me. It felt as if he was going to pummel me at any moment or even beat me to death. I looked back up at him, protecting my face. However, after a few seconds he enthusiastically shook my hand, introducing himself. Hello young man. Let me properly introduce myself. My name is Jack Ryder, he said violently but happily, shaking my hand. After a few seconds of rigorous handshaking he took a step back to dust off his pants. I stood there confused, wondering why this man had walked up and given me a handshake. The man took a few steps back and looked at the sky. It was only then that I realized that this man was holding the same hat the man from earlier was wearing. He had also taken off the outer layer of his suit. The hat was hidden under his suit and I had assumed it was just a bag of some sort. Strangely, I didn't notice that the tie was the same as earlier. Now that he was closer, I was able to get a better look at his face. He was young, but I could also tell he was very mature. His eyes were sunken a little and it was apparent that he needed a shave. The man's face was well defined. He had a short pointed nose and a scar that ran across his ear to his cheek. I could tell that it was a deep scar. The skin was a reddish brown color. It was clear that whatever had happened to the man must have been very severe. His hair was similar to that of a roasted chestnut. Streaks of yellow left the man with a distinct appearance. It seemed to almost glisten under the warm sunlight. Similar to his hair, his eyes are an amber color, a mixture of the two colors atop his head. I've a few questions for you and my shift just ended. If it does not trouble you, would you like to come stay at my home for a little while so we can talk? He said with a more serious tone. Sorry, but I'm worried that it will be dark by the time I finish everything here. That's a shame, but I guess I'm still a stranger after all. If you change your mind, here is my address. Whenever or if you decide to visit, if I'm not home you can ask my old lady if you can wait for me there. My old lady is a hospitable person and she also loves talking to the younger generation. I will definitely reckon about it, but for now I've to go and buy that ticket. Thank you for everything you have done, I'm in your debt, I said respectfully, bowing, and I thanked him. Ha ha ha, the man chuckled. There's no need to bow to me. Also it's no big deal to me you seem like a promising young man. Thank you. I will be taking my leave now. I wish you well, I said as I waved to the man.